Hi everyone and welcome back to another true crime video. Today's video is a really weird, creepy, kind of unusual kidnapping one. Also, I'm only 20 subscribers away from 1,000 subscribers, which is actually mental. Like, I didn't think I'd be able to get to this at all. And it is my birthday on Sunday the 9th of June. So this weekend coming up, and I would love to be able to hit 1,000 subscribers either before or on then. That'd be mental. Like, I'd really appreciate that, but like literally 20 more. I'd just like to start off before we get into the video by saying that I don't mean to disrespect anyone involved in the video. I'm just doing as much research as I can to basically shed new light on these cases and to get a bit more information out there. So yeah, with that being said, let's get into today's video. So in 1956, a 21-year-old man named Joseph Fritzl married 17-year-old Rosemarie in their hometown of Amstetten in Austria. The couple were a happy kind of couple and no different to any of the other couples or families around in that area, basically living an ordinary life. As Joseph and Rosemarie married, they introduced to the world 5 daughters and 2 sons. From the outside to anyone looking in, they seemed a normal family. However, whilst in the house on their own, it was a very different type of story. The Fritzl children were actually scared of their father Joseph, and he would sometimes be quite angry and aggressive towards them. The children would actually be punished if their father Joseph walked into a room and they weren't quiet, or whenever they'd misbehaved. Although he did have 7 children, it was clear to Rosemarie and the other children that he had a favourite, and this was actually Elisabeth. Elisabeth was born in 1966 when Joseph was 31 years old, and thereafter he soon took a shine to Elisabeth. However, when Elisabeth was just 1 year old, her father was actually sent to prison after being convicted of burglary and rape. Joseph was then released 12 months after incarceration, basically taken off his record after 15 years. In 1977, when Elisabeth was 11 years old, Joseph started paying more and more attention to her. In that same year, Joseph actually raped Elisabeth for the first time. She was understandably shocked and saddened by what her father had done, but she didn't think that this would continue. She thought that it happened and then that was it. She did not know or expect any of the things that happened to her later on in the years to come. After her school years and everything, Elisabeth knew that she had to do something to get away. She knew that she couldn't stay in Amstetten. However, the thing that was preventing her from doing this is she didn't have any skills or any money to basically go anywhere, to escape. So Elisabeth then decided to enrol on a local waitressing program, hoping this will provide her with enough experience and to build up some money to leave the town. Although her father's treatment of her, she would often run away at times, and these runaway attempts were never really successful. Every time she did try to run away, she was caught by authorities and returned to Joseph and Rosemarie. Then she basically knew she had to stick it out and she had to get it done to want to get anywhere or to be able to get anywhere. When she was 18 years old, Elisabeth actually graduated from the programme, and after this course she found herself a job in Linz, a city that was about 40 minutes or so away from where she currently lived in Amstetten. However, the idea of Joseph's favourite daughter going away upset him, and he didn't want her to go. He knew he had to do something to keep her forever, and then it was at that moment where he decided the only thing to do for him was to trap his daughter. On August 29th, 1984, Joseph asked his daughter to help with something. He wanted help with moving a door down the stairs into the basement. Elisabeth then complied and helped him carry this door down the stairs. Little did she know that this was the beginning of everything. As soon as Joseph and Elisabeth got down the stairs, Joseph then wrapped a towel around Elisabeth's head, which was laced with ether. Elisabeth then became knocked out. He then locked her in the basement and then went to go find his wife. After a while, Rosemarie then started to become worried and quite anxious about where her daughter was because she'd not heard anything from her. She eventually then went to the police and filed her as a missing person, and then within the hopes that somebody or someone out there could find something to bring her back to safety. The police searched for Elisabeth for months and months, and they couldn't find a trace of anything that could lead them to any possible whereabouts that Elisabeth may have been. That was until they got a letter. To ward off any unwanted police officers, Joseph actually got his own daughter Elisabeth, while she was down in the basement, to write a letter. And this letter was actually addressed to Joseph and his wife Rosemarie. Elisabeth wrote in this letter saying that she'd run away and to not bother looking for her, as she'd decided that she didn't want to come back home. The police then believed this letter as she had previously ran away already. Joseph then pretended to be shocked at this letter and used this to his advantage. He then began to churn rumours that Elizabeth had actually run away to like a religious cult, and he'd spread this around like the town and like the family. His lies and apparent honesty actually won over the family and the police and everyone else, so they looked like there was nothing wrong and she'd actually run away. And then obviously knowing about this letter, they thought that she was like happy and healthy in this cult that she'd gone to join, and that she didn't actually want to return home and she was fine where she was. The police then closed the search and the case for finding Elizabeth just stopped because they thought, oh, she's fine where she is, so nobody else looked into it, which was perfect for Joseph. And as I mentioned, unbeknown to her family, the police and friends, Elizabeth was literally beneath their noses. Literally beneath their noses. Her father had actually locked her away in a secret chamber in the basement, where she was actually chained to a pole so she couldn't move anywhere or escape. Joseph Fritzl would actually visit Elizabeth down there and often take her food and perform brutal sexual acts on her. After a while, Joseph actually put a longer chain on her so that she could reach the toilet and go do that by herself. Joseph Fritzl's wife, Rosemarie, then began starting to wonder why her husband was visiting the basement so often, like he'd go down quite regularly. Fritzl then made up this believable excuse that he was going down there to do like blueprints and drawings of some new machines and inventions which he hoped to sell in the future. His wife believed this story and complied when Joseph actually said to her, don't step foot in the basement or bother him when he's gone down there to do his work, so she thought nothing of it. From that moment, Fritzl then thought, yes, I've got it all to myself, I've manipulated everyone to believe me, and which he did. Of course, Elizabeth didn't actually give up without a fight, but these fights and everything to try and persuade him to let her come out failed. Over the next few weeks, months, and years, Elizabeth began to lose count of the numerous times that her father would visit her down in the basement and rape her. Although she hated every single moment down in that basement, her father was constantly threatening her with a horrible fate. If she tried to escape or overpower him in any way to try and get out, he would then gas the whole room. In 1986, Joseph Fritzl then began to realise that there were repercussions to his actions that he was doing on his daughter, and this was that Elizabeth had actually fallen pregnant. However, Elizabeth actually had a miscarriage and the baby was lost. But this didn't end there. 3 years later, Elizabeth fell pregnant again with her father's baby and gave birth to her first child, Kirsten. Just 1 year after Kirsten was born, Elizabeth gave birth to another child named Stefan. 2 years later to this, another child was born, called Lisa, and she was born in 1992. By this point, Joseph Fritzl came to realise that this one-bedroom prison wasn't actually big enough for his daughter Elizabeth and her 3 children, but he had a plan. When she was just 9 months old, Joseph encased Lisa in a cardboard box. He carried her out of the basement, up the stairs, into the family home, opened the front door, and placed this box on the front porch. He then added a fake note with this box, addressed from Elisabeth, asking if Joseph and Rosemarie could look after her daughter. Over the next few years, Fritzl continually raped his daughter Elizabeth, and Elizabeth fell pregnant again for the 4th time. In 1994, Elizabeth gave birth to Monica. However, she couldn't take it anymore. If she wasn't going to be free again, she wanted to make her children's lives as free as possible. She begged and begged her father for more room, and he reluctantly agreed. The eldest children were then forced to dig the soil and dirt with their bare hands, literally had the children digging to create more space. And then a secret labyrinth was created. In 1996, Elizabeth realised that she was pregnant again by her father. This same year, she gave birth to twins. Sadly, a little while after the both of them were born, one of the twins actually passed away. Elizabeth called the remaining child Alexander. Joseph showed no remorse for the death of his own son, and then instead of feeling this remorse to his own son, he placed him in the furnace and burned the body. Like Lisa, Alexander and Monica were actually taken upstairs to be looked after by Rosemarie and Joseph. And unfortunately, Kirsten and Stefan could not be taken upstairs or leave the basement to go join their siblings. Joseph refused to let them live upstairs like the rest of them. And this was because they'd already developed stories and memories of what it was like in the basement, and he was scared that they could tell the people who were up there and grass him in. Nevertheless, Rosemarie actually continued to care for these children, and they lived a relatively normal life. They went to school, had friends, and had hobbies that they took part in, and they were completely unaware of what was happening under the floorboards. Over the course of her incarceration, Elisabeth had been continually raped by her father, and in 2002, once again, she fell pregnant, and this point gave birth to her youngest child, Felix. By this point, Joseph came to realise that Rosemarie, who was upstairs, would have been overwhelmed with the amount of children that she would have had to take care of, so Felix was made to stay in the basement. Elisabeth and her children were obviously unable to tell if it was day or night because there was no light coming in at all, just constantly dark. By the time Felix was born, Elisabeth and her children actually had a little bit more room to move around down in the basement. They had a bathroom, a fridge, and hot plates that we used to cook the meals. They also had 2 bedrooms and one which was more soundproof than the other for obvious reasons. And this, obviously, was where Joseph took his daughter to rape her. Despite that dire situation, Elisabeth kind of took her initiative to make her children happy, and which she did, considering the circumstances. That was until Kristen fell ill. By April 19th in 2008, Elisabeth could tell that Kirsten urgently needed help. After hours and hours of convincing, Joseph Fritzl finally allowed his son, Kristen, to go to the hospital to get checked out. Unbeknown to her father, Elisabeth had actually placed a little letter that she'd written into the pocket of Kristen, and then this made the doctors aware of Kristen's lack of contact with the outside world. And this concerned the doctors because Kristen had no medical records at all. She had this kidney failure, but no records at all. Kirsten's story was soon picked up by the local news station, who were actually contacted by the hospital and the police. With no records of her birth or medical history, the hospital desperately needed to get in contact with Elisabeth to find out more information. Elisabeth was watching these news reports from her basement, and she knew she needed to do something. She begged and begged Joseph Fritzl to let her to go to the hospital to look after her daughter. Joseph eventually agreed these pleas, but then he needed a new plan. The police had then reopened the missing persons case for Elisabeth, as they were investigating all alleys to find Kristen's mother. Joseph then knew he had to fend off authorities once again. He forced Elisabeth to write another fake letter, and then backdated it to January 2008, and then postmarked this from a town miles and miles away. The police then investigated this due to the missing persons case, and this once again led them away from Joseph. In this fake letter, Elisabeth wrote of her time at this religious cult, and her plans to actually come back and look after her children with her mother and father. This would then have given Fritzl enough time to devise a plan of how to get the 3 children that were actually living in the basement upstairs. However, Fritzl's plan hadn't actually worked out how he'd hoped. After the police began looking into these religious cults and this other town that she said she was in, and also Elisabeth's handwriting, things didn't seem to be matching up. And then from this point onwards, they were questioning the authenticity of this letter. On the 26th of April 2008, Joseph actually caved in and allowed the 3 children in the basement to go see their mother and their sibling in the hospital. As they made their way out of the basement, the children first came to see what the outside world was actually like. However, the appearance of these children in the hospital was quite suspicious, and authorities were informed. When the police had actually arrived and saw these children, they became more and more suspicious, and then from this point, Joseph and Elisabeth were taken to the police station for questioning. Elisabeth was taken into a separate room and was reluctant to talk because of the repercussions. However, the police informed her that she would be safe and that she would never be having to see Joseph Fritzl ever again. Elisabeth was overwhelmed by this and felt a sense of security, so she told police everything. When she began talking about this story, she couldn't stop. She spoke to police for 2 hours, explaining every single small, minute detail. And all these small, minute details was over the course of 24 years. That same day, her father was then arrested. With her father being behind bars, she was then able to return home to see her mother, Rosemarie, and her children as well. And these children, some of which she'd not seen since they'd been born. Unfortunately, Kristen's health had not returned, and she was then put in an induced coma. However, Kristen wasn't the only one who was suffering the effects of living in the basement for so long. After being held captive in there for such a long time, with no natural light or any space at all, many of the Fritzl family were struggling to adjust. Although Elisabeth was only 46 years old, she had aged prematurely, and her hair was white all over. Her son Stefan struggled with back problems and found it really difficult to walk, and this was due to the 5'8" figure he had, being unable to fit under the 5'6" basement. After speaking to Elisabeth and hearing all these stories, the police were then questioning and wondering, would Joseph Fritzl admit to all these crimes? He confirmed that he had forcibly imprisoned his own daughter, fathered her children, and buried the body of one of his sons, which he actually burnt. In March of 2009, this marked the start of the beginning of the high-profile Joseph Fritzl court case, where he was tried for murder and negligence of his own son, and also rape, incest, enslavement, and false imprisonment of his daughter. Before the start of this court case, Joseph Fritzl had actually been evaluated by numerous psychiatrists who came to the conclusion that he was actually suffering from personality disorder. During these tests, Joseph Fritzl actually came out and said that he blamed these actions on abuse that he'd suffered when he was younger, and reported that he was born to rape. However, due to the severity of the crimes and his demeanour, the prosecutors then believed that he was still able and mentally capable of standing trial on his own. During the trial, Fritzl pled guilty to all charges, apart from the imprisonment and murder charges. However, this all changed after Elisabeth's video testimony was played in court. After he laid eyes on his daughter, he then revoked his previous statement and pled guilty to the further two charges. The judge awarded Fritzl with life imprisonment, and he's now serving time in an Austrian prison, where he lives with others who are criminally insane. Naturally, Elisabeth and her children were not mentally prepared for life in the outside world. After spending most of their lives locked in this basement, Elisabeth and her children actually got psychiatric care to basically show them how to live in the outside real world. The psychiatrists actually told them to express themselves through art. They spent the majority of the sessions actually thanking the whole community and everyone else for the support that they'd shown. For months after the ordeal, Elisabeth and her children were actually placed in care. However, the family soon decided that they wanted to get on with their lives and wanted to move and set up a new life somewhere else. The police actually gave them these new identities, found a new place for them to live, and made sure that they was well away from Joseph Fritzl. Despite their new lives, the Fritzl children actually had to deal with their new lawyers and also try and get away from all of the press and everything that was surrounding this case. The lawyers actually proved essential in the aftermath of this ordeal. The story had gained huge traction over the world, so they were actually used to handle press stories and other queries, the media interest, and their financial situations. During their years of imprisonment, the Fritzl children actually suffered a lot of emotional abuse, physical abuse, and for that they actually wanted to sue their father. Many experts in the field have actually calculated and come to an estimate that the children could be getting each €200 per day that they was in captivity. Although this is a benefit, this will still not get away from the fact of what actually happened. Elisabeth Fritzl and her children have suffered so much physical, emotional and mental abuse over the years that this is bound to stick with them for a lifetime, and no amount of money can equate to getting over that. Although nothing can actually be changed from the whole ordeal, they can live life now knowing that their captor is imprisoned and he will not be getting out. That then gives them a little bit more sense of security by knowing that he is locked away and he can't get back out, but it doesn't take away the fact from, like I say, it's all the abuse compiled together that they will be having to live with, and nothing can change that, which is so upsetting and sad. It's just awful. And this story is literally one of the most horrific and awful stories I've actually read up on. It's just creepy and weird, like how somebody can do that to their own daughter and then have so many children with them and think it's okay to keep them down. Oh, yeah, I'd like to know what you think about the case, and if you do have any like thing that you'd like to input, then please do leave a comment down below, because I would like to hear it. I hope you did find this informative and I was able to shed a little bit new light on the case, because yeah, this was a really, really strange one, and it's one that's probably going to stick with me for a while after doing all the research on it. So yeah, thank you again for watching, and I will see you next week. Don't forget to wish me a happy birthday in the comments. Bye.